Hey there, my name's Joe, and I'm going to start documenting the work I do on my Terramite, and I'll show that to you. Well, it's behind me. I'm going to switch to the front view and continue this.
Hi folks, this is just a brief intro to my video, which you can skip if you want, but I'm going to explain why I called it Terramite Destroyed. Even though the Terramite currently is almost functioning, the only thing left that I haven't had to repair, I think, was the frame. So why do I think it was destroyed? Well, in the past 10 years, I've had to fix the front bucket because the scraper is fractured and I've had to weld the bucket a couple of times. The hydraulic storage has been fractured at the angle at the bottom, and I've had to drain it and weld that and try to keep that from weeping. Front axles, I've probably broken 6 front axles in 10 years. I've put on different tires for the front in an attempt to keep out of the ruts and holes so that I don't break as many axles. The linkage between the left and right steering, I've had to reinforce. I had to put a piece of pipe over the original cross piece. The clutch system, I had to pull the engine and clutch out because I lost the clutch. It stayed in all the time because something loosened up in that unit that's inside. And I put that back together, and of course, shortly thereafter, I ran the engine out of oil, so now I had to pull the engine a second time, clean up the crankshaft with some muriatic acid, and rebuild that engine. The front mount for the gas tank and the sheet metal, I've had to basically redo the mounts so that the thing doesn't keep fracturing. It looked like it was originally bolted to the engine, which was crazy. The back brakes, the drums, I keep losing them on the ground. I've had to try to dimple the shaft that they go to. Currently, they seem to be okay. Final drives, I've had to rebuild each side. The seals and the bearings have gone bad. Both transmissions, I've had the covers off because the H hangs up in the middle when you go to shift if you shift too fast. Replace the ignition switch, replace the starter solenoid. In this episode, I'm replacing the brushes inside the starter motor. The rear cylinders, the cylinders for the stabilizers have been replaced. The cylinder for the main boom has been replaced. Other cylinders, virtually every other cylinder, I think I've repaired or repacked a couple of times. Several hoses, made a bucket, a 10-inch wide bucket, because the 16-inch wide bucket when you're laying pipe in New England is just crazy. You're always hitting rocks. So basically it's been destroyed piece by piece and I've had to repair it. That's the little intro to it. Oh, the dipper. Well, you'll see the dipstick is being totally rebuilt this time. I have repaired it a couple of times quick, but clearly it wasn't a fully corrected repair. The whole swing assembly in the back has been rebuilt / replaced. The piece that was inside of the swing mechanism is all cast, and it was broken into about 4 pieces. So I ended up building out of mild steel a replacement for that. And now that also has gotten kind of loose. So maybe in this video or the next, I'm going to update that or clean that up a little. So enjoy the intro where you'll actually see me a little more live. I thought I'd just show you the machine and you can look at what it looks like after, well, it's almost 50 years old. So enjoy the video. Thank you.
So this is a Terramite. A lot of people will notice that it looks very familiar. Those of you that are economy Power King buffs, it uses an economy Power King frame. This is the Terramite 2. I think it's probably the first one they had 4 wheels on, self-propelled, and it uses 2 transmissions back to back here that you can see. Anyway, this was beat up pretty good. I've had it probably for 10 years and did a little here and there, but it needed some work. So I decided, of course, I cooked the engine once. I didn't put enough oil in it, so I had to take it apart, use some muriatic acid to clean off the connecting rod crud from the crankshaft, and then put it back together. Seems to run pretty good. But I had some problems I got in a hole with a full bucket, and instead of using my head, I tried to pull myself out with the backhoe and snapped an axle off. They're not particularly heavy duty. This is a front spindle and axle, and one of the problems that I've seen is right here. I think this shoulder should be right up against this, and the taper sometimes isn't perfect. So I actually ended up on this machine here. This time I actually took the time to redo the taper so that the axles are right up against the I guess you'd call it the spindle or kingpin. And I also ended up replacing the bushings in the top and bottom. Unfortunately, they're 1-inch bushings. I can only get 1.25 inches. So I had to take those in the lathe and turn them, cut them off. Pretty hard stuff. But now the front end is pretty tight. And I also had to take this rod, which uses a ball inside with a spring-loaded piece on both ends. Well, the spring was broken, so of course it got really sloppy. So now it doesn't move much at all with what goes on. So that makes it very nice. And I also put a couple holes in my bucket here, one here and one on the other side, and that's going to be for this plow you see here. I have to put a new cutting edge on it, but we haven't been getting the snow we used to get, and it's a little slushy, so the snowblower doesn't like it. So I'm making this so that I can at least push with it. While I was at it, I changed out the brushes. Brushes were getting pretty low. We were down to the braid that was holding it in, starting to grind that off on a couple of them. They got pretty low. You can see that one's pretty bad. So I did that, and now I'm decided, after watching Matt on Diesel Creek, he has a channel out there stressing the importance of tightening things up, I'm starting to work on the backhoe portion, because it is a mess. Absolutely total slop. So that's today's project. Well, it's going to be the next few days' project. Spent a lot of time looking online for the types of pins to use, whether or not I need bushings, and these are cheap enough that this is regular steel, I believe. I don't think the rod end may be hardened, but the rest of this stuff that Terramite put together, I think it's just regular steel, because it's pretty well beat up. And I've got some work to do. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but right here is one crack. Over here, down the side, is another crack. And of course, this hole is elongated. I've got 3 holes for bushings. One here, one here, and one here. And then that is going to have to get line bored and probably bushed. The others, I think what I'm going to do is drill them out, then turn something to fit that. Oh, that feels like that might actually be a bushing. And then center them and so forth. And at the same time, this has been repaired a half a dozen times. It looks like it's been reinforced and fractured through here again. So I'm going to have to do some work on this one. So that's the project. We'll see what happens. I'm looking at, I don't know, this is not the main boom. This is the dipper or crowder. And the top two holes on it are for the hydraulic cylinders. And those, for my purposes, are tight enough. I found pins for the two cylinders that are tight enough. Now I'm going after the one that's just absolutely destroyed in the middle, which is a main pivot point. And if I use a regular 1-inch pin, it's pretty loose in there. But I found, I don't think it's stainless, I don't even know what it is, but I found a pin that apparently I might be able to turn, and it's a little over 1 inch. So what I'm going to do for an experiment is I'm going to try to grind that inside out slightly and see if I get that pin to go all the way through. It's a couple hours later, and I have this slightly oversized shaft, about 20 thousandths I think, fitting really tight in there, which is great. And I should have line bored it, but instead, because I didn't need to take off much, I used a combination of cylinder hones, some rotary grinding wheels, and a couple of really good files, and a lot of patience. And it's gonna be tight now, but now I have to fix the other end of this. This goes with this piece, and I've got a crack here. I've got to take the grinding wheel out, cut that all out, and this looks like it had a bushing in it. Maybe I'm going to drill that out and put a bushing in it. And the other side as well. They're pretty worn. And, well, we'll see. That's the next task. Okay, we're back after, half an hour or an hour of grinding. Found all the cracks. I think we found all the cracks in my boom here. Right there, you can see I had to grind that all the way down because the thing was cracked right through. And there's another one right here. I'm gonna probably cobble something onto that. And another little one right here. But this was the big one. It was fractured all the way through. So now I'm gonna weld up that with 7018, take my time. And I think what I'm gonna do is put a boss It's another day, and this is the dipstick or dipper stick, part of my Terramite backhoe. And as you can see, at the main joint, it has been repaired a lot. The most recent one is my repair here, and that bridged a weld they had butted in underneath this, and of course, because it was a butt weld that they didn't V out or used the wrong rod, had cracked right through. So I decided to bridge that as well, and the bottom piece of this had cracked, so I bridged that. And essentially the same thing on the other side. I'm surprised I didn't break the stick in half with some of my work. But I've found an oversized pin for this and cleaned it out. And these two holes, which are for the hydraulic rams, the hydraulic cylinders, are close enough that I'm not going to worry about them. They're not too sloppy. This pin that goes to the main boom was pretty sloppy. So that's now really pretty snug. The last one I have to do is this hole for the pin for buckets, and it is, between it and the buckets, it is terrible. And I have been fighting on how I'm going to work on this. I had thought of cutting it off and turning it on the lathe. There's a nice clean weld, but I don't know if I'd get it square again. So the first thing I'm going to try is to set it up on my Bridgeport and make a boring tool that fits my Bridgeport. And turn that out so that I can actually put a bushing in it. It has no bushings, it's just steel. And I think it's mild steel. And that's probably why it's worn out. So we'll see. I'm going to go try to set that up now. Okay, we've now moved inside to my Bridgeport. And the first thing I did is I took this piece, this headpiece, and I took a file to all four sides to try to get it, all the bumps and dimples out of it so that it would fit square in my vise. And then, up until now, I've not worried about things being terribly level with my Bridgeport, but now since I'm going to take the dipper stick and try to make that level, I better see if this Bridgeport spindle is level in both directions. So I'm going to do that and pause the camera for a second. I'm going to actually look at the spindle with a couple different levels that I have. And then once I can make sure that my Bridgeport is level, I'm going to lower this to a point where I think I can make a boring tool to fit. I believe it's in there already, a 1/2 inch collet, and keep it fairly tight. Unfortunately, I believe this is more than 1 inch in diameter, so I can't make it really close, but I have to measure that yet. So that's what I'm up to now. Battle number 1 is all set. I wasn't sure that the vise would open up large enough, but it does. And the table on the drill press looks like that'll be fine. I can lower that up and down to do a fine tune on this to keep it level. I don't know about back and forth yet. We're getting there one step at a time. I had to do some minor leveling on my Bridgeport. One of the problems being that, of course, it's a Bridgeport, an old single-phase M-head, and it's mounted on a post that's not splined, a shaft, into an old Brown and Sharp base. So even though I could get the table square, I wasn't sure about the spindle. So I made sure now the spindle is pretty close to what I need. So now, excuse me, I've got 3.5 inches or so of throw on the spindle here, but I need 4 inches to go through this. So I'm looking at making a 6-inch long boring bar. And this is the tail end of it right here in my lathe. This makes it about 6.5 inches. And I think this was really a homebrew piece. It was on an actual tooling stock, and I cut it off, and now I'm going to round it off so that it fits my 1/2 inch collet. And that's where we are right now. I'm getting ready to turn this so that it fits, and then when I get it all done, you'll see it mounted in the Bridgeport. And at that point, I'm going to stop, I think, and actually order the bushings so I get them the right size. I've turned my boring tool And here it is. This had a mount for actually a tool post. So I cut it off at about 6.5 inches, chucked it in the lathe, turned this down to exactly a 1/2 inch, so that will fit perfectly into the collet. And now, of course, I can do this, but not with one hand, I don't believe. Oh, yeah, okay. So that's how it's going to look. Looks like I have to move that in the center a little bit. So I have my boring bar. Now all I have to do is take and get that really rusty set screw out of there, and maybe get a different tool in there. So that's the next step. I think I'm on my way here. We'll see. Now I've got this all lined up and level, and I actually ran the boring bar through it once and took off very little with it. I've got a carbide tip in there. It's leaving a little rough inside, but I can deal with that. I've got a lot to take off. And of course I spent all that time, 20 minutes tooling up that bar and cutting it off from the tool post piece. And I went and found 2 more boring bars that were already 1/2 inch. So I guess I'm not as organized as I thought. What I'm going to do now, I think, is simply wait. I'm going to order the bushings now that I know I can do this, and look up the sizing, and then I think I'll have those on hand when I get close to being done boring. So that's where we are right now. And then the dipper will be done. After I ran my initial hole, I made several changes here. The first is that I no longer am supporting the tail end of this with the platform on the drill. Instead, I clamped it and put brackets and so forth underneath this, so that the whole unit is supported just by the milling machine. And I had a little slop in my cross feed, so I actually went and bolted that pretty tight, so everything should stay where it needs to be. The back to front has a lock underneath, which is fine. And I also milled this down to a 1/2 inch as well. That makes the boring bar flex a little more, but the problem I have is that this piece here is 4 inches. The most I can get out of my Bridgeport is 3.5. So I intend to bore the 3.5 to the right size for the bushing, then make a centering bushing for this boring bar, and then do a hand drill for the last 1/2 inch. I think that's the most reasonable for a machine like this, 50 years old. I see I should weld some more on the back too. I just noticed. Wouldn't hurt to weld that up. That's not mine, but I guess it's my machine. I should probably weld it. They stopped a little short. It hadn't broken, but it doesn't hurt to put a little more on, I guess. So that's the deal. Taking just a little bit at a time. It's not a commercial project, so I don't have to worry about being fast. I just don't want to go too big. So I just cut. I have to get out to 1.12 something. It's an 1.1 inch bushing. So I'm out to 1.105 or so. And I'll just keep taking a little more each time. And I bought some, although it's pretty smooth inside, I bought some rotary hones I was going to try. They're called Flex Hone. And just to smooth that out and see what happens when I press them in. I may press them in and use Loctite. But we'll see. We're not there yet. We have to do a little more boring here. So that's it right now. Well, the last you saw, I had this on my Bridgeport, and I was boring this last pin hole, complaining about how I can only get 3.5 inches in. What I ended up doing was simply raising the table, since I had locked all the other axes, and got down to within 1/4 of an inch of the far end. Then I was able to take an 1 1/8 drill and actually put it in there and drill through the last little bit of it. I then took a hone and or a reamer, I should say. I took a reamer and bored that out so that the bushings all fit in here. So now the bushings are in nice and tight, and I have exactly 1 inch again. Now this bucket I built out of a bucket I bought at an auction, and this is not the standard pin. This bucket is too big. Rather than make this smaller, I simply turned a new shaft so that A, it fits in here really good, and B, fits 3/1000 under that 1 inch. So now it's all nice and snug. Everything in here looks pretty good. I had to make some spacers. Clearly something got twisted in here previously, so this cylinder has to be shifted all that way in order to keep any sideways torque on it. But it looks really good and stable. I now have to make a little bushing for here, because this is what's left to move. And then I'll tackle this top one. I'll probably do the same thing for that. This is 20/1000 out in this position, but in the position that it uses for pressure, it's 50/1000 out. I may try to ream that out a little to get it a little more snug. Again, this is just a piece of yard equipment I use occasionally now, so it doesn't have to be perfect. But when I first did the pin down below, I said good enough, and then I remembered my uncle said good enough never is. So I'm making that tight now. So that's where we are with this. It worked out pretty good on the Bridgeport. Got a little bit of a harmonic and bend in my boring tool. I expected that, but I took my time, and it worked out really pretty good. We are back outside on another day, and I think this will be the final day for this part of the repairs. We left off with pressing in the bearings, the bushings in here, so that I had 1 inch. And then this bucket that I made up, I turned this outside so that it was round and made up a custom pin. Now this is bigger than 1 inch, so then I turned it down to 1 inch and then put a bushing in on this side. So that's really clean. I may have gone over that before. Then this piece, which is also supposed to be 1 inch, but it's mild steel, there's no bearings or bushings or anything, was 1.05 this way and 1.02 this way, with the center being a little less worn. So I started looking at my options. I tried to use a reamer on it. It was too non-circular, let's say. So I actually took an 1 1/16 drill, and with great difficulty made it through with the drill. Then I used that flex hone, the rotary hone that I bought, cleaned it up quite a bit, and then I reamed it out to 1.075, I believe, because this pin is 1.072. I had cleaned these out pretty good. I used the reamer in those quick on both sides. Turned a pin and this thing is snug. So the tail end of this is in pretty good shape now. But as you can see, this is pretty worn here, and it's going to stay that way. As is this one. This is no longer centered on this barrel, but it's good enough for me to use around here. The big trick is the major pins are nice and tight, and there's not a lot of slop in the others, and I've put some side spacers in, which makes it a little more snug. So the easy part next is to take that bucket and do the same as I did to this bucket, so that I don't have to, well, maybe I can use the same pins, but at least then I don't have to deal with doing any more work in here. This is exactly 1 inch. This is 1075. So that's going to be about it. I think I'm going to stop this for a second and fire up the machine and show you the next project. I've raised up the boom just for this exhibit, but you can see this guy is pretty wobbly, and there's source of three of them. The pins down below, the hydraulic cylinder underneath, maybe the other end of the hydraulic cylinder. So these pins and cylinder, the other end of the cylinder, and of course this pivot in here, which is a big pin that goes all the way through, which has had some serious issues. On top of that, this pin for the main boom, and this pin and this pin are all kind of sloppy. But that's a whole nother project, and don't know if I'm going to tackle that right after I finish this bucket and pins set up here, or if it's going to wait a while. The problem is that I thought I'd put 2 or 3 days in on this. Well, if they were 24-hour days, I might have done it. But I actually started this about a month ago. Got sick in between with the flu. That killed 10 days. 9 days on vacation. And here I am, the end of June. So we'll probably call it quits right there. Everything from here up has all been taken care of. I'm really happy with that stuff. I'm just going to repeat what I did on this bucket to that bucket, so I'm not even going to go into that. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see how soon I can get out a video on fixing the swing and main lift.